Hi there, I'm Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez, and this is the Design Your Physician Life podcast. Welcome to this episode brought to you by our maxAllure Mastermind, an exclusive mastermind for physician entrepreneurs. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Crewe. She's a mental health expert and empowerment coach. She's the author of the Sled and also the book, You're Not Your Anxiety. Besides her podcast, she also leads the Eunoia collective. This is a year-long mental health membership for women. Her main business is the Eunoia Medical. This is a 100% virtual medical clinic specialty in the comprehensive assessment and management of mental health symptoms in women. We have a great conversation with Dr. Crewe about the business of healing anxiety. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Design Your Physician Life podcast, where you will get excited about being a physician, learn the tools that can help boost your success, and great tips from successful doctors. Join us to unlock the keys to an amazing physician life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Myrdalis Diaz-Ramirez.
Well, we're very excited to have Dr. Crewe with us today, coming all the way from Mexico. She's in Mexico today. She is really a family physician who practices in Canada, somewhere in Canada, right? She's a world traveler, and she's a mom, and she's best known for her book, You're Not Your Anxiety, How to Stop Being an Anxious People-Pleasing Mess. She hasn't only written that book, she also has an ebook on how to talk to your doctor about mental health. And we're very happy to have you here, Carly. Welcome to our show.
I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to chat with you.
So how are you doing these days? Any anxiety in your life?
It's funny you mentioned that, actually. Yes, there actually has been. I think that even though and that's actually one of the pieces that I sometimes use in marketing is like, even though I wrote the book on this, it's like, I still have anxiety. And I think that that's, I say that to eliminate the shame or remove the shame or the judgment that we often have on ourselves when we are really anxious people or we have some sort of, anxiety disorder. My experience with a lot of women with mental health issues is that it can be a real source of disappointment in yourself or shame that you even have anxiety at all. And so I'm here to say that even though you can write an entire book on managing it, that it still will stick around. And it's just, again, how we manage it. So yeah, there is a little bit of anxiety in my life right now for a number of reasons.
Okay, well, we don't have to dive that into there right now. Let's talk about other things that took you to write that book and taking care of patients with mental health issues. In this podcast, we want to help current practicing physicians, and we also want to inspire future physicians. And I want to know what inspired you to become a physician.
I am somebody who, it sounds like so cheesy. It's like, I wanted to help people, but I wanted to help people in the sense that I really wanted to be practical in a lot of ways in their life. I wanted to help a lot of people with a lot of just day-to-day things, right? So specifically, that's what brought me to family practice, is because I've never been someone, although I so respect and honor and value my specialist colleagues, I was never someone, or at least I thought, that wanted to really be an expert in one small thing. I wanted to know a lot of things about a lot of things. I'm just very multi-passionate by nature. And so when I decided to become a physician, that's where family practice came out. But interestingly, that was what brought me to medicine, and how I've evolved has definitely changed. So when I applied to medical school, being in the vein that I wanted to help people, my backup plan, had I not been accepted, was going to be a therapist. I actually wanted to do marriage counseling. And I had done an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I just found it very fascinating, the working of the brain and the nervous system. And so at the time I said, well, if I don't get into medical school, like most of us have always had those fears, right? When you first apply, if I don't get in, I'll do this. And I had this plan that I was going to be a therapist. And thankfully I was accepted and went through and did my training in family practice. And then about 5 years into my practice, fell back in love with the mental health work and the brain and psychology. And here I am, basically a physician and a therapist. So it's kind of come full circle, but yeah, I think that just wanting to genuinely be of service to other people and inspire other people was one of the big motivators for me to want to become a physician.
So all these you did in Canada, right? You're a Canada girl.
Yes.
And where did you study in Canada?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Windsor in Ontario, and then I went and did my medical degree in Calgary. So my husband and I, we were young and newly married. In my second year of medical school, we got married. And so we wanted to carve a new path, and we went out to the mountains, and that's where I stayed. I trained for residency as well there in Alberta, and then practiced in a small town in Alberta for about 5 years before I launched into the nomadic life.
So tell us about what happened 5 years into your practice that you became passionate about taking care of patients with mental health issues.
Well, I think that many people could probably agree with the fact that when you become passionate about something, it's because it's impacted you personally in one way or another, right? Like we move through our own problems, and then we seek, in a lot of times, we seek, how can I help others go through this in an easier way, right? Or how can I avoid others going through this terrible experience I had? And for me, that experience was a pretty significant postpartum mood disorder. So in 2016, I was very lucky to get pregnant with twins. And we had a very healthy pregnancy, and thankfully shortly thereafter, my girls were very healthy, but I was not healthy. So within 2 to 3 months of having my kids, I always have considered myself to be somebody who's like just a bit high strung. I think a lot of people who are physicians can identify with just being like this high achieving, somewhat like high performing anxiety kind of thing. Like we're perfectionistic, we're achievement oriented. And that's just what I chalked it up to. But after I had my kids, it enveloped me as like this terrible postpartum mood disorder. And I specifically call it mood disorder because it wasn't necessarily depression, it was anxiety. And it took over my personality within a very short time, and I was really unwell. And so after probably about 6 to 9 months, like the timeline's a bit foggy, but after about 6 to 9 months, I actually kind of woke up to this realization, like, this is not how motherhood's actually supposed to be. Like, this is not what it normally feels like. And I think that a lot of new moms have that experience sometimes when they do have a postpartum mood disorder, because if you've never done it before, how do you know your experience is not how it's supposed to be? Right. And that, sometimes it's hard. We don't want to reach out. Don't want to say what's going on. So we have nobody to tell us that like what we're experiencing is actually not normal. So it took me, even as a mental health professional, even as somebody who really loved the brain and worked with women with postpartum mood disorder, I didn't identify the symptoms even in myself. So it took a good 6 months or so of like figuring out what it was going to look like for me to heal this and recover from this mood disorder. And it looked like a variety of things. Mindset, it was therapy, it was exercise, it was lifestyle changes, it was putting in boundaries, it was taking meds, right? Ultimately, one of the biggest game changers is going on an SSRI and feeling like, oh my God, my neurotransmitters are normal again. And I actually feel like myself a bit more. And so that took me quite some time. And it was I say that their birth was my rebirth, and it was like ugly and painful and transformational, like most birth experiences are. And from that came this renewed passion for wanting to understand women's brains and wanting to help them, not even just through postpartum mental illness, but just mental illness on the whole. I think that while we do our best as physicians to help our patients, sometimes the systems that we learn and how we teach people doesn't meet them where they need to be met, right? Like sometimes even our healthcare system isn't necessarily designed to support our patients in the way that they actually need to be supported. And I found that especially in my postpartum mood experience, it's like not even physicians, but just like accessing therapy was extremely hard when you have 2 little babies that you're breastfeeding constantly, and you're so anxious that you can't leave the house, and you're so anxious thinking somebody's going to judge you. So the last thing you want to do is ask a friend if they know of a good therapist, because you're so afraid of being judged, right? So there was just all these obvious gaps when I went through my own experience, being like, why is it this hard to find a therapist? Why is it this hard for me to get out the house to go to therapy, right? And I realized it wasn't that it was something wrong with me. It was just that our system isn't designed really to meet patients where they need to be met.
And so talking about your system, we know that it's Canada, but we share the same things in the United States, very similar.
Totally. I say like the healthcare system, not even like the healthcare system in like the countries, but just how we deliver care, right? In general, across borders, even. It's just it's not wrong. It's just doesn't fit everybody where they need to be met. Do you know what I'm saying?
So 6 months into you haven't had babies, you not only are dealing with that, you're also dealing with what's going to happen with work and eventually get inspired to write a book and all that stuff. So how did your healing happen so that you can move into not only having babies, into a nomad life and being an entrepreneur, basically?
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like it just happens overnight, but anybody who's an entrepreneur, right? Like, it's so not overnight. It's like these various evolutions of your mission and how you fulfill them at each stage is different. So when I first came back to practice, my kids were 9 months old. And I just had this passion for, I want to help more women. And initially all that looked like was like, I would be talking to my postpartum patients at their postpartum visit and just being more interested in how their experience was and breaking down, like, you know, when they're like, oh, I'm good at their 6-week visit, I'd be like, no, but like, really, how are you? Like, I was just there. I know what this is like. It's okay. And all of a sudden out comes this outpouring of, I'm not okay and I need support and all this. So that's what it kind of started as. Then I wanted to know how I could access more women. So that, of course, naturally led me to an online space and figuring out how could I use my skills. At the time, this is pre-COVID. So online telemedicine wasn't as rampant as it is now. So instead, I looked at maybe I could be a coach and I could work with women outside of my medical capacity and really help coach them through mental health challenges. And so I did that for a time. That was like in the 2016, 2017 year. And did mental health coaching. So I ran group coaching programs and I liked it, but it didn't ever really feel like a fit because interestingly, although I wanted to get out of the medical way I was treating patients, I also felt a bit handicapped because as a doctor, I can prescribe something for you, but as a coach, I can't. It felt like just not quite full, right? So after that, I often liken my story to like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where like Goldilocks sits in the different chairs and she's like, nope, not quite. Nope, not quite. And then she finds finally that chair that fits good. And that kind of feels like my story a little bit. So I tried that and then I shifted and pivoted and tried some various other little entrepreneurial pursuits that never really felt like the right chair. And then at the end of 2020, when the pandemic was just kind of in its rip roaring newness, let's say, and all of the advent of virtual care came out, I said, why am I trying to be something I'm not? I'm a physician and I'm an expert. I was working a lot with women at that time with therapy, right? I was doing like psychotherapy in my family practice and I had quite a large population of patients that were seeing me regularly, but I had some things happening in our lives and we wanted to be a bit more nomadic. So this is where the idea of creating my virtual mental health clinic came about, that and knowing that there is this gap of like that women, the women that need my support often have families. They often have jobs. They can't come and drive and, you know, for an hour to sit down in a therapist's office. Like it's just not that feasible. So creating something that was virtual was just like a no-brainer. So I started that in early 2021. I opened the virtual doors to Eunoia Medical. Eunoia means in the pursuit, like is a well mind. That's what it is.
Eunoia. Let's spell that.
Yeah, it's EUNOIA. So it's the word means a well mind, beautiful thinking. And so I opened the virtual doors to that. And the intention had always been, it was just going to be me seeing my patients and I could just, you know, be a little bit more flexible for them and they could be flexible. I could still see my family practice patients. Just the virtual dynamic made it that much more flexible. And within 3 days of opening the doors, I had like more than 60 women on my waiting list that I was like, oh dear, I don't think I'm going to be able to meet this need. So I then decided through some support with my very smart husband to invite other female physicians to see if they wanted to join me to provide this really important work. And I'm super passionate about the impacts and the ripples of helping women with their mental health and what that does for our society. So he's like, well, maybe somebody else wants to do this with you. And so I started asking around and speaking to some colleagues. And before I knew it, I had 3 more doctors who joined. And then I had 6 doctors who joined. And then now we're a team of 12 in like 9 months. So it grew really fast. And so we're helping over somewhere between 350 to 400 women with their mental health, like on an hourly basis, like a weekly basis for an entire hour, they get time with a physician, and it is funded by our Alberta healthcare plan, which is amazing. So it eliminates the barriers of women having to leave their home. It eliminates the barriers of them having to pay out of pocket or have third-party benefits, and they can really access high-quality mental health care from a woman who really understands what it's like to navigate being a woman and to have a family and to have a career and to know those struggles. And so it's gone really amazing. That's just one arm of my quote unquote empire that I'm building, but it's one that I'm really, really proud of. And so through all of that work is where my book came out of, right? When you work with so many women on the same thing, you start to notice there's just so many themes. And my thing was like, I need to get this information that I'm saying one-on-one to everybody out to a bigger population. And so it was quite an undertaking, but I published You Are Not Your Anxiety last summer and it's been awesome. So that's the long of my story.
That's amazing. So there's 3 topics there that I would like to cover. One is working with your husband and being an entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's something that many people want to explore, having your spouse being an entrepreneur and help you support that. And then having a mission and vision that covers the whole family. Number 2, briefly, how to the process of writing a book. What happened to you in that process? And then number 3, what the book is really about, which is, we're going to get hopefully to some of those great tips in this book and this Eunoia system. So tell us about your husband's support since the girls were born, all the way into becoming this little empire, as you say. What has happened with that and the relationship, and how's that working?
Yeah. So my husband's a power engineer, and he went off work when our girls were born and has been off ever since. So our kids are 5 now. And it's really over the last 2 years that we've really kind of taken both of us to start building this business, and to, for him to take a really active role, just because there wasn't a need necessarily for him to be super involved until it got a little out of control for me to handle on my own. And it's definitely a learning curve working with your partner, because inevitably one of you, and that's usually like in my situation, me, because it's my business and I started it and I'm the face of it, like one of you is always a little bit more knowledgeable about what's going on. And so we've had to work really hard about being clear in our communication about who's responsible for what in the business, and then actually giving that responsibility to that person. Because I think what ends up happening sometimes in a marriage is that we can be good at separating responsibilities, but then if we know that person's like had a really busy day or just doesn't have the energy, like that we'll step in and do their responsibility because they're our partner and we know that they're maybe feeling a little stressed, they maybe can't get to it. And that's my bad. So like I'll give him tasks and he's very able to do them. But because I'll be like, oh, he's had a really hard day because he's also a stay-at-home parent, he's had a really hard day with our girls, like I'll just step in and do it. And that's where I feel like if you do want to build a business and be a couple that is doing an entrepreneurial pursuit, you have to be really, really clear about whose responsibilities are whose, and to trust and respect each other, to let each other do it in your own time. It's just that it gets so messy, right? We're starting to mix like family and our lifestyle and my work and his work and everything. It's all just all wrapped up together. So it's really, I think excellent communication skills are absolutely required to make it work successfully, and a willingness to be flexible and to understand that like the way that you do things doesn't always work for every single person. It's not like an employee where you can just pay them and they will do it your way because you're paying them to do it. It's like really having to shift your mindset away from like, I know the right way to do this, to maybe there is another way that you thought of, or maybe you have a skill that I never even thought of because I've never thought of you in this entrepreneurial way. Like that now we can do this in a more efficient way. So it has definitely been an adventure and something that we're always continuously growing and figuring out how to do better. And it also, I feel like it can be really enriching though, too, because for your marriage, because for myself, when I was kind of doing it on my own, and he's been a stay-at-home parent, like I shared, for 5 years. So I've always been well supported in the sense that I've had somebody at home doing a lot of the home things, right? So that takes a lot off my plate. But it's really enriching in the marriage because in a way I feel like now we're in this together, right? Entrepreneurship is such a gamble. Like truly it is. It's like you could put it's not medicine. You could put a lot of work into a business and it could still fail. Like it's not a guaranteed win. And that's a lot of risk to take on as yourself. But if you have a partner who's also involved in and committed to the success and really like convicted in the fact that this is what is going to happen for your family, it just helps you kind of share that burden of fear of like feeling like it's all on me, right?
Well, I have to tell you a little story there. So we have a lot in common, Carly and me, and we just discovered that recently. I also have twins, boy, girl. They are 15 years old. And I was in bed rest for 11 weeks. They were born 10 weeks early. One of them was born with a craniofacial defect, nothing else to do. They're wonderful kids right now. And it was a lot of stress. My husband went to bed rest, and actually we were able to be together so they were born in May, and I went really back to work in person in January. So we had that time together as a family. Since then, he was stay at home dad. And then we opened our clinic together. We managed it together for almost 7 years as entrepreneurs. So he was the manager, I was the doctor. And not only the manager, we had a lab together. He would run the lab. I would be the medical director for the lab. And it was a lot of work together. After that, we had another clinic, and that clinic grew to 2 clinics with physical therapy, acupuncture, pool therapy. We had a multidisciplinary program. We won awards together. Then after that, we had another clinic, and we also had an entertainment business. And nowadays, we're doing 2 businesses to help physicians together. So about entrepreneur and a husband and marriage and twins and anxiety and all that stuff. So we're together. So it's really a challenge, but as you say, communication is key. So to be able to survive that is possible. The good thing is that you have to make it work. So for your family, that's something that you have to do. So you'll have to always find how to make it work. So let's move on a little bit to your book, because your book is how we get to know you on this side. And I'm very excited to hear about it and your journey about how to write a book, what it has meant to you in terms of work, the process, and then we'll go on to your book teachings.
Sure. Yeah. So I've always really been a writer. I write a lot, like even from like when I was a kid, I used to like write books of poetry and write stories and things. So writing's always been something that's a really important creative pursuit for me. And I started my kind of like author journey, if you would, actually doing a co-author project with the same publisher I published my book through. And that was kind of my first foray. And a co-author project is where you basically come together with maybe 10, 20 other authors, and you each write a chapter, like a story, almost like a chicken soup for the mother's soul kind of idea, right? Where everybody contributes a chapter. And you get to have your play, this author role a little bit without having to write all the book. And so it's a good introduction to say, like, to step into that space of like, I'm no longer just writing for like maybe the people, in my inner circle. Now I'm writing this, and it's going to be on Amazon. It's going to be in Barnes and Noble. It's going to be in Chapters. It's going to be in Indigo, like that anybody could pick this up. And that in itself is quite a mindset situation when you start to write a book, is like, if you really let yourself get into the understanding of how many people could pick this up and how many people could misinterpret what you're saying, and how many, like if you let yourself go down that anxiety spiral, it can be completely catastrophic for writing a good book. Because you can get totally in your head, right? Perfectionism as well comes out. All these different things come out. And so writing a book is really a practice of figuring out, one, how much do you believe in what you're saying, right? And really coming to terms with like, are you willing to back what you're saying and believe, like, you believe so much in these teachings that you want to have them in other people's hands who you may never meet, right? And then like, being committed to the practice, because writing a book. So my book ended up being like over 100,000 words, and which is probably too long, but like it was the practice of itself of writing is really time consuming. It's absolutely a labor of love. It's vital to have a good team, right? To understand like the publishing process of like what goes into it. And, that there's, developmental editing and getting somebody who can help you really flesh out where everything goes in the book so that it makes sense to someone other than you. One thing that I came up against a lot is like when you're writing so much and you've gone over it hundreds of times and you're like, is this even going to make sense to anybody who's not in my brain anymore? Because it's like you're trying to take all the tangled mess in your brain and make it logical for somebody who has no idea what you already know. So that process in itself is really important. Having a developmental editor who's not even equated, like, my developmental editor had no knowledge about anxiety and mental health. So it's like, I want to write it for her so that she can understand, so that the general public would understand, right? So it's those sorts of things. We can't write unless you're writing a book for the people in your
medical community.
In medical community, say, right? Like then you can write at a different level and you can speak at a different level, obviously. So there's that. And then there's like the technical editing. So, and then there's typesetting and there's marketing, and there's just a lot of pieces to the publishing process. So it's making sure that you're really doing your work up front to find, how do you want to publish? Are you going to publish on Amazon or on your own, on self-publishing? Or do you want to publish with a blended publishing house like I did, or a hybrid house, or, those sorts of things. So there's lots to be considered. It's worth it. I am so proud of having my book. And the coolest experience, honestly, is when people come out of nowhere on social media or email or whatever, and they'll just be like, I picked up your book and I swear you wrote it for me. And like those moments are what make it all worth it, right? And I've had those so many times where people seek me out on social media and be like, send me voice notes on Instagram, like, Carly, oh my God, I just finished your book. I can't believe you wrote this. I swear you wrote it for me. And it's those moments
can you tell me a story there about transformation where the person told you, I was feeling like this and now I feel like that? What have you heard?
Oh my God. Yeah, so much. Actually, one client of mine who I work with now, she specifically sought out my clinic and wanted to work with me after finding my book. So I was I did a webinar with another psychologist about the pandemic, and she heard me on there specifically. And she's like lovely. I just love her so much. This client that I have, she's really like kind of like the poster girl for literally my brand. It's like, this is the women I attract. And she's very high achieving and very kind and sweet, and also struggles a ton with perfectionism and struggles with, being herself authentically, because what are people going to think? And then all the anxiety that comes with that, like living a life that's out of alignment. So she came to me, same thing. That's what happened. Shared a bunch of posts on social media about like, I've read 1 million books. I've read lots of books about personal development and all this, and nothing has impacted me like this book. So then from that, I met her there, and she was on the waiting list for the clinic. And it just so happened that when I had availability on my schedule, she was who I got to work with. Like, she got to work with me basically. And she was so thrilled. So since then we've worked together for like the last 3 or 4 months, and the changes are astronomical. So, I mean, I don't want to give away too much because it's personal details, but like, she's looking at things like leaving a career that she has been doing for everyone else's sake for a really long time. Right. But now realizing like, oh my God, this is why I'm so anxious. It's because I'm living this life that isn't even mine. And I've been too afraid to step into like my own things that I really love and do what I want to do, and how that really changes the anxiety. Right. So we've worked on boundaries, we've worked on assertiveness, and this kind of work. I kind of summarize it down to like, yeah, treating your anxiety is so much more than treating your anxiety. It's really figuring out as women how we choose ourselves all the time, right? Choose ourselves, like, instead of choosing the path that like parents want us to go down or spouses want us to go down or whatever, right? It's so much more than just treating anxiety.
Very common, nowadays, a lot of people keeping their jobs because they have to do or meet, or they feel that they have to meet this other responsibility, and it's all on them, and they stay there in living unhappy lives, which increases your anxiety. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety itself. Let's talk about when you're working with one of your patients in your clinic, your virtual nomadic clinic, and you're incorporating what you call the Eunoia method. So what happens when you receive somebody? What does the process look like?
So in terms of like actual practical process, the client they have to self-refer, and they get to see one of our nurses that kind of screens them, make sure they're appropriate for the clinic. And then when they come in to see me, my consult process is very comprehensive, because I believe that anxiety is caused not just by like what's happening in our brain. It's so many more things, right? So I take a really comprehensive approach, which I call the Eunoia approach, which is just basically like the biological approach. We look at like, first, let's start with your body. Like, how are you sleeping? Are you exercising? What are you eating? What substances? What's your biochemical baseline? Are you on meds? Do you use marijuana? Like all these different things that could absolutely have an impact on your mental health in general, not just anxiety, because it's not only anxiety that we work with. So we start there. And the bio approach also looks at things like hormone health. Are you postpartum? Like, is there certain things that we need to address on the biology side of your experience? And sometimes that looks like, do we need to look at starting a medication? But that typically happens later on if that needs to be done at all. And then another big piece, obviously a large proportion of what I do, is the psychology of anxiety. So this is psychoeducation, teaching about what is anxiety. Do women even know? Like, so many clients who come in to see me, they know something's off, but they're not really clear. And I have to be like, well, what you're experiencing is anxiety. And they're like, oh, like they don't actually even understand that maybe how their brain thinks and all the worrying and all the things that they're experiencing, that's not normal. Right?
What's anxiety? What's that?
Yeah. So anxiety is a primitive response that exists in our brain, right? As human beings, we all have anxiety. It's the degree to which it impacts us that is what the difference, right? So every human being has to have anxiety. It's at the basis. It's kind of like our fight or flight response. It's designed to keep us alive, right? So anxiety is generated in the amygdala and the limbic system. And when we experience any sort of threat to our safety or our identity, anxiety responds, right? This also, anxiety will respond when we're under like a chronic amount of nervous system activation due to like, say, a pandemic or a job stress or like a stressful marriage or whatever. Like when your nervous system is under chronic threats, your anxiety will kick in to try to protect you, right? So how anxiety looks, the manifestation of anxiety depends on the person, but most often it's, feeling really keyed up, having a lot of anxious thoughts that are often irrational, right? Like worries about things that you're like, I know that would never happen. Why am I so worried about that? Right? Like that's a hallmark of anxiety. Difficulty sleeping often comes with anxiety because again, it speaks to that nervous system activation. If you have an activated nervous system, your limbic system's just like on high alert constantly for the next thing that's a threat. Like it doesn't just settle down and sleep at night. It's not just like, good night, we're good now. No, it keeps you up because you got to worry about stuff. You got to be prepared for things, right? So that's basically kind of in a really quick nutshell, what I call anxiety. And I believe that it's part of our human brains. It's just a matter that some of us are more sensitive or have more sensitive amygdalas. I think about it like this, like if you're in a building, a big building, say a school or whatever, you want that building to have a fire alarm system, right? Like this is a smart thing for a building because when the fire happens, you want the fire alarm system to turn on, let an alert, and everybody leaves, right? The trouble is that with a lot of people who struggle with overactive anxiety, so like generalized anxiety disorder, whatever, panic disorder, however you want to define your particular diagnosis, that it's like that fire alarm system is just super sensitized. It's like the sensitivity of it has been cranked up. So now instead of just going off when there's fire in the building, your fire alarm system goes off when there's like maybe potentially could be smoke, maybe it's maybe going to happen. Like, right. But there's not necessarily the actual threat existing. So I use that analogy because most people are like, oh yeah, I know what that feels like when there's no actual threat, but my body is paranoid and it's freaking me out and it's making me think that I have to be prepared for something that's happening when nothing's happening, right? That's kind of the experience of anxiety in a nutshell.
So then you got the patient, they came to you, you did all these biological analysis, and then you told them anxiety is what you have. So what would be the next step for them?
Yeah. So then we examine the psychology of anxiety, right? Where does it come from? Because our own cortex, like our smart thinking brain, has the ability to ignite our anxiety, ignite our amygdala through thoughts, right? So these are things like cognitive distortions. So when you have a false thinking pattern, basically you have a cognitive distortion. A false thinking pattern could be something like black and white thinking, super common, really common cognitive distortion, where you're like, I'm a good mother, and then I lose my temper once, and now I'm the worst mother ever, and I just have this like barrage of self-defeating talk, right? That's a black and white thinking distortion. Like your brain refuses to allow you to see gray. So we look at their psychology. We look at their cognitive distortions. We do a lot of psychoeducation around anxiety. We do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy around identifying the thought that triggered the anxiety. And can we give you a new thought? Can we do things in a different way? And then a big piece of my approach is actually looking at the woman in her social context. Because as women, as humans, we're inherently social creatures. And so our relationships in our lives inevitably impact our mental health, right? Whether it's we worry about whether our marriage is solid, or we worry about our child and them getting hurt. We worry about the fact that, we can't, seem to support our mother. We can't, right? We have we don't operate in a vacuum. We exist in relationship. So I find it incredibly helpful to look at how a woman shows up in her relationships, because assertiveness is like versus like passive communication and lack of boundaries is one of the biggest problems that causes anxiety. Is that we as women have been conditioned to be passive. We've conditioned to be people pleasers. We've been conditioned to be caretakers, put everybody above ourselves. And we really need to examine that if we want to make meaningful change in an experience of anxiety.
So how long does it take for the patient to maybe realize, that they need this change in mindset and getting used to these new thoughts, these ideas that you have to get used to before you can really make change and decrease this anxiety? How long does that process take normally for somebody?
Yeah, it's really variable because everyone's experience is so unique of what's causing their anxiety. I mean, I work with my clients anywhere from like 3 to 6 months, but some clients I have long-term and we just kind of consistently work on different things. I would say that, if you're very open to learning new mindset, if you take action on doing like nervous system regulation skills that I teach and that sort of thing, I see people having really meaningful change in their anxiety within 6 to 8 weeks without medications. I usually leave any kind of pharmacological intervention if needed to like at least 6 to 12 weeks down the road when we've actually done some of the therapeutic work, like the psychotherapeutic work and some of the talk therapy, before I start to dive into kind of like pharmacological support. That's not a rule, obviously. It really depends on how I'm finding the progress to go with a client in psychotherapy, because if you are so activated, if your nervous system is so activated that you can learn all the skills and strategies in therapy, but you're so anxious that you can't apply them, then that's where leaning on a little bit of like psychological or pharmacological support can be very effective and helpful.
So suppose I got your book on Amazon here in the United States, and I love the ideas of your book. And, maybe I really don't feel that anxious. I've learned from your book, and I'm not anxious to the point that it stops me from doing things, but I would like to learn more. How can I work with you if I cannot be a patient with you in Canada?
It's a fantastic question. Actually, I have a mental health membership program actually that's open to anybody around the world. It's a women's mental health membership program. It's a year-long membership program. And it's actually designed to take the concepts of my book and expand them even more. So each month there's a new theme that's kind of related to the approach that I take in my book. And you get like a mini course. So it's a video course taught by me on one of the topics. So the topics are things like insomnia, eating for mood, right? Mood, like food for mood, movement for mood, perfectionism, people pleasing, boundaries, all these self-care, mindfulness, all these different topics that are really relevant, high yield topics for women's mental health. And one of them releases every single month in a community. So the other thing about women, like I said, we're inherently social creatures. And what I always say is like my unique approach of having insights into hundreds of women's brains because of how many women I've worked with. I know the similarities between so many women. Like I know how the flawed thinking patterns from that woman are so similar to that woman, but they don't know. Right? As an individual woman, as an individual patient, they don't know. And when you think that you're the only one that thinks this way, that feels terrible, right? But if you can be in community and you can say like, ooh, vulnerably share, like, I have this crazy thought, and somebody else goes, oh my God, I've totally thought that before. Now, all of a sudden, there's healing happening. There's connection. It's shame, right? It removes stigma. It all of a sudden there's connection. You're like, you felt that too, like that feeling. It's like, this is why groups of mothers are so valuable, right? Because every single mother is like, oh my God, I'm messing up my kids. Then you meet with other mothers and they're like, I feel like I'm messing up my kids too all the time. And all of a sudden there's connection and you feel better, right? Every woman feels better in community.
I remember being scared.
Yeah.
I remember being scared to say that I really didn't like to be pregnant. I didn't enjoy my pregnancy, especially after 11 weeks of bed rest and not being able to do all the things that you normally do. And you feel like kind of, disabled. You are because you cannot do a lot of things. So I was like so scared to say that out loud. The time came, it's like, I cannot hold this anymore. Somebody has to be feeling like me out there. So it's really important to feel that validation that you're not alone so that healing can start happening. So then you were saying you're in the groups and then what happens there?
Yeah. And so in the membership community, you have the community. So the group of women, all that are really forward thinking. Like, here's the thing about being in a mental health space is that you have to be very cautious about the communities that you put yourself in because some mental health communities are not helpful. Sometimes it's like jumping into a Facebook group with a bunch of people who are just making it worse for you because they're complaining about how terrible everything is, right? And it just brings you down. And when I wanted to create community years ago, I remember saying, I'm going to create a group of like a community of forward-thinking women who are actually just like taking radical responsibility for their life, overcoming whatever obstacles from mental health to like mindset and leadership challenges. And they're going to be moving forward. It's a really forward-thinking community. And so that's how I've designed the Eunoia Collective, is to be this community where women can show up, say, this is how I am. This is really hard right now. And I'm ready to learn and, take, like I said, radical responsibility for my life. So they get the community of women, they get the mini courses. And then I actually am in the community a couple times a month as well, doing like laser coaching, answering specific questions. There's community connection calls. We have monthly challenges. We have guests. It's really fantastic. So, and I created it for this exact purpose, is when you were like, well, how does somebody outside of Canada, right? Or even outside of Alberta, because I really practice in Alberta. So I only see patients virtually in Alberta. How do I meet this need that's not providing medical care, but is providing so much information and so much empowerment and support for women to really take their mental health into their own hands, right? If we just give women, I believe women are so competent. If we give women the right support, if we give women the right information, they will make the magic happen for themselves. Like, they're very competent. So I just wanted to create a space where it was fertile ground for that to happen.
So let's try to summarize some points as, for some tips. First, recognizing that anxiety is a problem or that something's going wrong, right? That's going to be the first for any problem. Then number 2, how to seek that help. And number 3, which things would you like to expect when you're going to go and talk to somebody about anxiety? Which things should they really evaluate you for and you should expect from that treatment?
Yeah, those are really good questions. So yeah, first we have to be aware of anxiety as a thing. And I talk about this in my book too, actually. I call it the anxiety recovery process, is that a lot of clients that come to me, a lot of people, they are what I say in the vortex. Like, you know, when I said that I was in my postpartum mood disorder, but I didn't know, like you don't have the awareness because you're so in the vortex. You're like in like a tornado and you think this is normal. And so there has to be a point at which you're starting to question, like, is this normal? Like, I don't really feel like myself. Like, is this normal? And so you have to first seek out, like, is this anxiety, and have an awareness. And then, yeah, it's accessing supports. Now, obviously we're speaking in such different locations. And so I don't know what it looks like, but you know, the first step I usually recommend is accessing your general practitioner, your primary care provider, right? Who is, if not the best mental health person, is also the most connected person. They're not the best all the time. Like not all GPs are like me and has the comfort and the knowledge in mental health. That's fine. But they can be the most connected to the resources, right? They're aware of like what is available in your local area. I'm a big advocate of doing, you know, some sort of supportive talk therapy before we look at medications. If it's you, if you're listening and you're like, what do I want to go? I don't want to start meds. That's fine. Just advocate for that, right? Like just say, I really want to learn more about mental health first before I do any medications. Not that there's anything wrong with meds, but just sometimes people are a little sticky about that. And then when you do see a therapist, I actually have a whole podcast episode on how to make the most out of going to therapy, because it's often expensive for some people, right? Or it's an investment of time. It's an investment of energy. You really do want to make the most of it. And I think there's some really critical things you can do, including, you know, being really honest with yourself about what you're going to do, right? Like, what's the purpose of this? Why are we going? Like, are we going to go there and pretend nothing's wrong? Because that's going to be a waste of time. Are we going to go, we're going to trust the therapist. We're going to, you know, trust them as the mental health expert and be really honest and vulnerable about what we're experiencing so we can really make change. Among other things, like setting goals for yourself in therapy. Like, how do you want to feel? What would it look like if you were feeling less anxious? Like, what are some of the end treatment goals that you're looking for? And being really clear on those so that you can see whether you're actually making progress. And then the biggest thing that I would say when it comes to therapy is that if you're of the privilege that you can choose and try different therapists, it's really just highlighting the value of finding somebody you can really connect with. Because what happens more often than I'd care to admit is that clients will come to me and they'll say, I saw one therapist once, it was a terrible experience and it's been years. And now I'm just trying this again. And I'm like, no, like we have to be willing to try, even if the first one doesn't fit. Like, don't just like call off all therapy and just never get any help. Like you have to try, you have to say like, no, I'm worth going and trying again, even though it's scary, and finding somebody who I really feel is listening to me, who seems to really understand, right? Who I'm feeling progress with. If you're going to therapy for 6 sessions and you're like, well, I don't really feel that different. Like maybe it's the time to find a different therapist. Not that that therapist is bad, but like therapy, I say to my clients all the time, is really a puzzle piece situation, right? Like the client and the therapist / mental health professional, whichever, like whether it's a counselor, a social worker, whatever, whomever, a coach even, it's like they have to be a puzzle. The puzzle has to fit, right? Even in coaching, it's not just, this is not only speak to therapy, but so I hope that was helpful. I'm not the best at being succinct. I won't lie. I didn't write 100,000 word book for no reason.
Well, that was super, super exciting. I'm not anxious about talking about anxiety anymore. That's a fact. I want to thank you for being here. I want you to share how people can find you, can find your book. For those who are in Alberta, how they can get a hold of you. For those who are out of Alberta, how can they get to participate in this project in the Eunoia coalition? And tell us about how we can get a hold of you.
Yeah. So my primary social media platform is definitely Instagram. I hang out there a lot. So if you want to connect and send me a message and I heard you on the podcast, like by all means, it's at Carly Crewe. It's very simple. Crewe, like the crew of a ship with an E on the end. And my website is the same. It's just carlycrewe.com. And on there, I have a page of like how to work with me, right? So I have a variety of different means that we work together. One of which is the Eunoia Medical Clinic that's specific to patients in Alberta and Canada who want to access actual medical care for telemedical care for mental health, right? That's a kind of a unique, specific thing. In that capacity, I work as a physician and I am following all the regulations of my license. So the other option too, for people outside of Alberta and outside of Canada, is the Eunoia Collective, and in Canada, of course. The Eunoia Collective is a membership program. It's a private pay membership program. So you can pay it out of pocket and you can be a member of the community for an entire year to really work on your mental health, get access to me as a mental health expert, and kind of get access to my teachings. You can learn about that through my website as well. And then kind of the third arm, which we didn't really dive into because it's outside of the medical kind of conversation, is I have an arm of women's empowerment called BraveHer. And it's a movement, it's a mission all about choosing ourselves as women and the ripples of what that turns out for our families, for our communities. I really believe that if you empower one woman, she can change the whole world. Like what women want in this world is really good. And so I think that when we help them overcome obstacles, we help them learn more about themselves, feel really empowered, like the world can be so changed. So that's called BraveHer. And through there, I have a variety of different coaching programs and masterminds and mentorship programs. And so you can check that out all on my website at carlycrewe.com.
Awesome. And one last question. Where is Dr. Carly Crewe and her crew going next from Mexico?
Yeah, so we're here for the winter and then we'll be heading back to Canada because I do a lot of my work while I'm in Canada. And so we'll be landing on the East Coast and making our way back to Alberta. And who knows where we'll go from there. So we'll see. It's not that's the thing with the nomad life. It's very flexible. You just kind of go where the wind takes you, where you feel like going. So it's an adventure for sure.
Well, thanks a lot for being here. And if anybody wants to hear more, learn more about Dr. Carly Crewe, please visit her website, carlycrewe.com. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you.
Well, guys, that's it for today. Stay tuned for more of our Design Your Physician Life podcast, which was brought to you today by our maxAllure Mastermind, an exclusive mastermind for physician entrepreneurs. We will continue to bring you useful resources to develop your physician entrepreneur life, like we did today with Dr. Carly Crewe. You can connect with her through her eunoiamedical.ca, that's EUNOIA medical.ca website, or carlycrewe.com. Thank you for joining us. We hope you had a great time as we did. Stay in touch with us. Visit our website at www.maxallure.com. This is MAXALLURE. And please don't forget to subscribe, like us, give us 5 stars, and share the love with your friends and family. See you later. Thanks. Bye.
Please remember that Design is not providing specific financial, medical, or career advice. Our only intent is to stimulate your appetite for growth by sharing our experience and those of our speakers, coaches, and guests. Your personal growth and success will be unique to your circumstances and your hard work. We sincerely hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next week.